Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much to the students, the advocates, the educators that are here with us today, and good morning. Today is a good day because today the House Education Finance Committee will hear House File 1502, the Ethnic Studies for All bill. This bill and the movement for ethnic studies is student-driven and supported by community advocates, educators, parents, and more. House File 1502 will ensure that all students across our state have access to ethnic studies, a curriculum that ensures that all students can see themselves in the classroom and that all students' race, ethnicity, culture, identity, and history are recognized and celebrated in our classrooms. This bill will do three things. First, it will ensure that all high school students in our state have access to an optional ethnic studies course curriculum, and that all high schools offer that course. Second, it will create a work group of various stakeholders to create curricular resources and standards for ethnic studies classes. And third, this bill will allocate funding to support school districts in the implementation of ethnic studies. Students of all racial and ethnic identities benefit from ethnic studies. Today's students are growing up in a more globalized and interconnected world. Ethnic studies invite students to deeply explore the many diverse cultures and histories within our state and country, and in doing so, gain a better understanding of themselves and their classmates. Ethnic studies equip students with the knowledge and perspective to live and lead in a more diverse, globalized, and interconnected world. Ensuring that all students in our state have access to this important course is vital for the future of our state, and I feel honored to carry this bill. Now, I would love to call up our next speaker, Talmay Zhang, the Network Director and Executive Director for CAL, the Coalition of Asian American Leaders, one of the organizations that have really been driving the ethnic studies work in our state. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Talmay Zhang, and I'm the Network and Executive Director of the Coalition of Asian American Leaders. We are a cross-sector, cross-ethnic, and cross-generational organization that has over 5,000 network leaders across the state of Minnesota. Today, I want to share a personal story about myself. I came to the United States when I was 3 years old, and when I started school, I really struggled to read. I always had a really hard time and had no interest in reading. We would, in first grade, we would have these round tables where there would be 5 kids, and each kid would take turns reading from a book. And every time it was my turn, I would start breaking out in a sweat, and I was just really embarrassed and humiliated because I couldn't read. So I hated reading. I hated school. And at home, I wasn't able to get any help because my parents had just come from Laos, and they had very little education. So there was really no one to help me learn how to read or even develop stronger reading skills. I pretty much struggled throughout elementary and middle school until I went to high school, and I had a teacher who gave me an assignment to research my history. And so I worked with my history teacher as well as the librarian to learn more about the Vietnam War, refugees, and why our community came to the United States. It was through this project that I realized I could make a connection between what I was learning and how I fit into the community. And it was this context of making my schoolwork and reading relevant to me. So it was no longer about reading or the lack of being able to read, but it was really about learning about who I am and understanding how I fit into the larger world. So high school really changed everything for me. And once I made the connection between what I was learning and who I am and building a stronger cultural context and cultural identity, did I start to really enjoy reading and enjoy learning. And so looking back, the only explanation for changing how I was as a student, from a student who was practically failing, I was getting C's and D's, and if I got a B, I was really proud of myself, to someone who got almost straight A's. So I graduated high school and went on to multiple Ivy League schools, as well as getting multiple degrees. This couldn't have happened without me making a connection between what I was learning and why I needed to learn those things. Now I have 2 kids, an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they're experiencing the same thing. They go to a school out in the Minnetonka area. And my daughter came home one day and said, my teacher doesn't know who Hmong people are. And I was very surprised because most people know Minnesota has one of the largest, most robust, active Hmong American communities in the country. And so she was baffled by this, and so was I. So I went to a parent-teacher conference and I met with the teacher, and the teacher actually shared with me that one of the teachers shared with me that they've been trying to get resources to learn more about Asian American history. And he actually mentioned a really well-known professor here at the U of M, who now is teaching at Harvard, Erica Lee, who had just published an Asian American history book. And he was trying to learn on his own about Asian American history. And so what I learned from that experience is that teachers want to have resources, and they shouldn't be left alone to use their own financial resources to learn on their own. So having some kind of standard curriculum and resources from the school district would have really helped him. So my organization, CAL, has also been working with other school districts across the state of Minnesota, and in particular, the Edina School District, Lino Lakes, Forest Lake, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And Minneapolis and St. Paul already teach ethnic studies, but other school districts are not. And so recently there's been incidences in Edina where Asian American communities have been racially targeted. And so together with parents and students, CAL has been a part of what's called the Edina Asian American Alliance. And that intergenerational organization is working to ensure that there are ethnic studies in courses that reflect the students, the diversity of the students in the Edina School District. And so I stand here proud with Representative Spencer Mora, who's our chief bill author, and our other legislative champions. And in particular, Representative Joachim actually is my state representative. So I'm extremely proud that you're here, and I'm very grateful for your leadership in this work. To really urge the Minnesota legislature to support this bill and support teaching American history in a holistic and inclusive way so that all of our students actually feel represented and understand the connection between their own personal histories and the history of American history here. Thank you.
And next up, we will have a student perspective from student Ethan Vu.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ethan Vu, and I am a second-generation queer Hmong American. I am 17 years old, a junior at Spring Lake Park High School, and an advocate with Youth for Ethnic Studies. My testimony for this issue takes us inside a humanities and social studies class. In my U.S. history class, I learned about other communities that shape our country. I completed the reading assignments, answered the critical analysis quizzes, and presented informative research projects. But then I'm left thinking to myself, when will my history be taught? When will my classmates learn about my community too? Throughout my school years, I knew very little about the history of the Hmong community, my community. My parents are refugees of the Vietnam War. As speakers of their native language, native tongue, my parents weren't able to tell their son, who mainly spoke and comprehended the English language, about our tragic history. It wasn't until my involvement with Youth for Ethnic Studies that I began to discover more about my identity and community. I gained a better awareness of my background, which in turn helped me navigate school and extracurricular activities with certainty. For the first time in a long time, I have confidence in my identity. Not many people know that the Hmong Americans came from the mountains of Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. They aided the CIA during the Vietnam War. As the CIA retreated, the Hmong were left behind, where they were tortured and massacred. When the Hmong were able to finally flee to places like US, they faced other adversities like poverty and racism. To this day, the Hmong American population faces the highest rate of poverty compared to other Asian American communities. As for racism, perhaps learning about our history in school could prevent racist attacks against the Asian American community. So much trauma and resilience are in Hmong American history, and yet I saw none of it in my school classes. Are the hardships and triumphs of my community not historical enough to be taught in schools? Who is the audience anyway? Let me remind you, it's the youth. That includes BIPOC youth. They are young students like myself, We are classmates. We are your neighbors. This is a need for ethnic studies. My involvement with Youth for Ethnic Studies took me to Roseville Area Middle School, where I saw firsthand that other students are looking for educational materials to acknowledge and recognize them too. I co-facilitated a 2-day workshop where I saw students' eyes full of wonder and curiosity. From the school faculty that invited us to the students we taught, there was a space for ethnic studies. Therefore, I urge legislators to enrich our classrooms and uplift our neighbors. Vote for ethnic studies immediately.
Now we will have Danica Leonard come up, who is the Policy Director of Education Evolving. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Danica Leonard, and I'm the Policy Director for Education Evolving. We are a nonpartisan organization that works to advance student-centered learning for all Minnesota scholars. And Education Evolving is a part of a larger coalition of more than 24 organizations who are working to ensure that all Minnesota public school students and private and charter have access to ethnic studies courses, principles, and curriculum. I am the product of Osseo Public Schools and Minnesota colleges and universities. I'm a mother of 2 brilliant scholars who are a part of Hopkins Public Schools, and whose father, my husband, is who was a product of St. Paul Public Schools and is currently an educator in Minneapolis Public Schools. Minnesota has currently one of the largest opportunity gaps between students of color and white students, including high school graduation rates, testing scores, and more. I urge the members of the House Education and Finance Committee today to join the vanguard of other schools, districts, and states and vote in support of this bill. The extensive body of research on ethnic studies affirms what educators and students have long known. Ethnic studies improves educational outcomes. Participation in ethnic studies strengthens students' racial and ethnic identity development and attitudes towards learning ethnic studies, because it enables all students to better understand the rich heritages, cultures, and histories of the land upon which we live, and told from multiple and diverse perspectives. It fosters cross-cultural understanding among both students of color and white students and aids them in valuing their own cultural identity while appreciating the differences around them and closing opportunity gaps. It encourages educators, schools, and districts to value the cultural capital in their local communities. This is not a new idea. Minneapolis Public Schools and St. Paul Public Schools have made ethnic studies a graduation requirement. Nebraska, Nevada, and Washington are adapting their academic standards and curriculums to include ethnic studies. Connecticut and Indiana require public high schools to offer an elective ethnic studies course. Oregon, Texas, and Vermont are updating their K-12 standards with ethnic study standards to be more inclusive of the histories related to racial and ethnic groups. Our state will thrive with generations of scholars prepared to compete, to grow, and to innovate on a local, national, and global scale because of our commitment to ethnic studies as a part of a world-class education. By promoting empathy, critical thinking, social awareness, ethnic studies can help create more well-rounded scholars who are better equipped to navigate the complex challenges of the modern world. Thank you to Representative Sensormura and the 34 co-authoring House representatives for your leadership and support of this bill and your efforts toward creating policy that will benefit all students, as well as to Senator Kunesh for championing the Senate companion bill. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now open to questions. Yeah. So, this bill is both ensuring that students across the state have access to ethnic studies while also giving districts the flexibility to meet the needs of their local student populations. And we've seen this across the state from the 30 different districts who have already implemented ethnic studies curriculum. So for example, in Minneapolis, there are courses specifically focused on Somali students. In St. Paul, I believe that there are courses focused on Korean and Hmong students. And we know that, our student population changes throughout the state. And so we want to make sure that districts can tailor their curriculum to do that. One component of this bill is creating the Ethnic Studies Working Group, which would be comprised of different stakeholders, community experts who would be able to help create those different curricular resources so that districts could find the kind of curriculum that would work for them and their student population. Thank you. Other questions? Mm-hmm.
Is this bill kind of I don't want to say response to that, but a way to kind of separate Minnesota from states like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say mainly no, right? Ethnic studies and the movement for ethnic studies has been around for a long time. People have been working on the ground here in Minnesota for a long time to get this passed before some of that more recent legislation came in. But, I think that this legislation and ethnic studies in general is a reaction to the laws that we've seen, but also the school climates and cultures that many of us have experienced, right? Which whether it's just not reflecting our population or straight out saying, books about your population and books about your experience are banned, that has been a part of our education system for a long time. So this is both working to undo that. And I think, ensure that if political winds change here in Minnesota, we have a really strong framework to make sure that students will still have access to these courses. Yeah, so I think as Danica talked about, there's a variety of ways that states are approaching this. Many states are, embedding ethnic studies into some part of their curriculum, ranging from putting it into the standards, having an optional course, adding a graduation requirement. If folks have been, paying attention, the original form of this bill did have a graduation requirement piece. That's really coming from the young people who are saying that we think it's imperative that not only students that maybe, really want to take this course, but that all students are leaving high school prepared with the skills that they need. And that includes knowing about diverse histories and cultures. So I think that there's still, a lot of appetite from community and from our coalition about eventually reaching a place where we could have a graduation requirement. But, due to lots of conversations that we had with school districts and with the Department of Education, it just did not feel like this was the year to make that change. And I think probably and potentially members of the Education Finance Committee might want to speak to this more broadly. But, I think that there's a lot of work that we can do just thinking about what are the graduation requirements that we have and how are we ensuring that young people are leaving our schools prepared to enter the workforce and be successful. And so I believe that, knowing about different cultures and identities is really key to being a successful adult out in the world. And I hope that, eventually we can get to a place where our curriculum and our graduation requirements reflect that. Yeah. Is there someone who want to answer that?
So in Minnesota, we have a form of setting standards for all the different courses we've required to graduate at the state level, but the curriculum is left up to the local school district. The social studies standards that has been through a 2-year process and review is embedding a lot of this ethnic studies curriculum, not the curriculum, embedding the ethnic studies right into the standards. So that makes it a lot easier for us to say, districts, you have to teach to this, because the districts are responsible to teach to the standards. The districts themselves get to decide what that curriculum is, and that's why it's so important to have the working group put together kind of some model curriculum or resources for districts to use so they can customize that to their student population.
Elaborate just a little bit more on the difference between this bill and what it's addressing, and I know that the standards review has been in process for a long time. Just the different areas of addressing the difference between.
I am not an expert on the Minnesota state standards, but the hope is that the process that the standards group did, which is comprised of school district members, teachers, folks that are steeped in education, that look at all the different strands and what needs to be taught to meet those benchmarks, really went through a transformational change in the last few years and have embedded a lot more, I should say, up-to-date information into what needs to be taught in the standards. And that's why you see this bill kind of pointing back to them, and they should be starting in school year 26-27. They're in the final process. And that way, the working group can then help develop, different types of curriculum that the districts can use. So it's really, they work really well together.
And then just a logistics question. I understand that the House file, is there a place on the Senate bill, and what's the strategy going forward? I know there's a few today. Are you looking to move this forward separately?
Yeah, so this bill has already had a hearing in both the House and Senate Education Policy Committee. It has a second hearing today in the House Education Finance Committee. We are anticipating that this bill will be included in both the Senate and the House Education Omnibus Bill.
The budget target is that education high up on this, that will help with too much pushback.
Yeah, I'd have to turn to our lovely chair for that question.
Who would have thought we'd get a target question today? No, we are really excited that we got targets not only early, but they're joint targets. This is really historic, so we can get to work right away. A lot of the chairs and the committees have a lot of work to do before the end of session, and now that we have targets early, a lot of that work can be done in conference committees, so it's open to the public, which is a great way to do work. We're excited about the investment we can make in education, but our districts have been underfunded for almost 2 decades. So it's going to take more than a biennium to turn that ship around and fill that hole. So we're really focusing in on what we can do for our schools so that they can have financial stability going forward. And then also so that they have the tools to meet the needs of their students and their staff and their teachers. So that's what we have a lot of work to do.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice job.
Maybe educator can answer to them like she is.
Okay, see you.